Hello, I'm LaTonya Turner. As you've just seen, the definition of health may change as we age, but the goals for quality of life remain the same. To help us continue our exploration of health and well-being, we've invited 3 professionals to share their perspectives and offer advice. First, Carol Orsborn, whose most recent book is titled The Spirituality of Age, A Seeker's Guide to Growing Older. Also, Dr. William Petrie, Director of the Geriatric Psychiatry Outpatient Program at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Finally, I'm joined by Jernigan, Executive Director of FiftyForward, an organization providing pathways to health, well-being, and lifelong learning. Thanks all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good. I want to start by asking each of you to define healthy aging. You know, I know from talking to you, and we've seen from the documentary, each of you have a little bit different perspective. So let's start with you, Carol. How do you define healthy aging when someone says that to you?
You know, I have to start with a little story, which is that my mom was a very powerful woman who was used to being in control. And when she went through the end-of-life processes, she became a victim of aging. And I realized that she had not been doing the kind of spiritual work and personal growth work that I've been doing all my life. And I determined at that point that there must be a better way to go through aging than how she did it. And so for me, successful aging has a very deep psychological and spiritual component to it.
And it sounds like maybe some of that involves being in control of the decisions that are made around that.
I suppose so, but for me, the emphasis is really how to live through the end of your life when things are out of your control.
Okay.
It has to do with acceptance, and it has to do with faith and a belief that there is some meaning and purpose in your life, no matter what comes our way.
Okay. I have to ask, do you think we put too much emphasis on the physical aspects of aging and doing things physically different to impact the aging process?
Well, you know, I think as long as you can be physical and as long as you want to be physical, and even if you don't want to, if you're capable, there's probably some role for discipline in that. But I do worry. I just saw the documentary, and I do worry about the man who is the champion runner at 63 or 64. What happens when his knee blows out? Because I think some people who place a tremendous emphasis on things that may spin out of their control are not. They don't have the time for the internal personal growth work that takes a lot of time, as much time, I think, to have a spiritual practice and to be asking yourself the big questions about ultimate concerns that are equally important to having physical practice.
Okay. Well, Dr. Petrie, I imagine you have to kind of reconcile both the mental, spiritual, and the physical part with some of your patients. So what do you tell people healthy aging is? How do you describe it?
I think it has several components. I think the most important thing is adjustment to changing roles and changing circumstances that you're going to encounter with aging, whether it's 68 or 88. I think, secondly, it's crucially important to remain productive and active, to keep pedaling. That's what I tell most of my patients. You can't coast. You've got to keep pedaling. And I think the third important aspect of aging is to stay engaged with a social network and to have a social persona which interacts with a variety of other people.
Okay. Well, speaking of keeping pedaling or continuing to pedal, Janet certainly is a model for that. So when people ask you what is healthy aging, and not everybody can achieve the goals you have, but what do you say?
Well, I agree. There are just so many different components, and it means different things to different people in their lives. But I think starting out, it's just having very mutually supportive relationships, real good exercise and fitness and healthy nutrition, trying new things, having a very significant purpose in life, and just the courage and the perseverance to keep on keeping on. And when you experience setbacks and issues that you've not faced before, realizing there are people all over the community who have been through things that are very similar. So being able to reach out to other people, to take advantage of resources, just continuing to stay very active and very involved, and then finally just having a real positive outlook on life. I think studies show that people who have a very positive outlook live on average 7.5 years longer than people who complain a lot and are more negative.
Okay, all good advice. I think one of the things that a lot of people want to know, because I was talking with some of my coworkers about this, is, and this relates to something that was said in the documentary about adapting to your limitations. So it would be great if there was some kind of little guide like there is when you have children and they say by 6 months your child ought to be doing this and by a year they ought to be doing that. I don't know if that's possible, but can we expect certain things to sort of start becoming more limiting in a progression that people can then learn, okay, I need to adapt to this because my vision is changing?
Well, the problem is that people age at different rates, and it doesn't start in the 60s, it actually starts in the 20s. Many people age in a very different rate than others, so that the number really doesn't make a whole lot of
maybe there are markers
relevance
to look for.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think changes in work, changes in family relationships, changes in physical activity obviously are going to be very big. But we really don't know how well some people can age. Okay. We're stuck back at in a situation where I think we don't expect enough from people who are aging.
Right.
In ancient Rome, the life expectancy was 28. In 1900, it was 47. Now it's going to be over 80 now for women. It's less than that for men. But we need to, I think, have a lot more emphasis on what people are capable of doing. As Janet's trying to operate, to get people physically active and intellectually active.
Okay. You know, Carol, you talked in the documentary some about perceptions and attitudes about aging, just what Dr. Petrie has just touched on, and sort of our culture around aging. Do you have any thoughts about that and how it definitely has evolved, but yeah. I'm not sure you're completely happy still with how people perceive growing older.
I guess I'm going to have to play devil's advocate just a little bit, because we certainly don't want to marginalize older people and let them have that slow, sad decline into depression that I think, again, that was my mother's expectation and I think a previous generation. But in some ways, I worry that we may have overcompensated with activity theory, this notion that we have to be busy and productive and reinventing ourselves all the time. So there's this new thing happening called the conscious aging movement that my book and a number of us are sort of popping up talking about, and that is, at least for the boomer generation, so many of us have had a contemplative practice for years. And we've been trying to strip away our egos and be in the present moment and enjoy sitting by the riverbank or whatever. And we've worked so hard for so long, some of us would like to just have part of the definition of successful aging, the notion that we can, in addition to when we feel called to produce and to be active, that it's okay, we have the freedom also to enjoy the present moment. And especially with the very aged, that woman on the park bench, we may have to call social services. She may be depressed, but she also may be having a transcendent experience. So I'm just trying to open it up just a little bit.
I wonder how much, though, might be cultural, because I can remember growing up and seeing some of the elders. I grew up in the South, so people sat on their porches in the evening, and that was a social thing. Sometimes they would sit there. But there was also a different level of respect, I think, for those who did. And I remember my friends and I really, engaging with some of those older people in a very respectful and healthy way. So some of this may be driven by how we see people who are growing older. Would you agree, Janet, that it's, you know, it's that expectation in our Western culture that you've got to still be busy and active and doing something? And, as opposed to sitting on your porch.
When I was 20, I thought, boy, if you were over 30, you were over the hill. And I was even trying to decide how I would go professionally, whether I would go into recreational and physical therapy kinds of things, or whether I would go into psychology or some other field. And I just figured at the time, well, probably my mind is going to outlast my body. Somehow I just had this feeling that, boy, that body is really going to decline. And, you know, just been so fortunate through experiences with the National Senior Olympics and really knowing people who are in their 90s and 100 years old who are, you know, still very active and physically capable. And I think it's something that Dr. Petrie said too. I think many people short sell themselves about what they can accomplish, and as they have one setback, then they think, okay, well, I can't do this any longer, and the world just becomes smaller and smaller and smaller until you have someone who's alone in a room and just needing all kinds of support. So if there are ways to help people realize, I know Peter Pressman, who's president of the Nashville Striders, always says it's not how far you fall, but it's how you bounce back, and he's a 70-year-old runner, a good friend of David's, who was featured in the documentary. But Carol, you had asked about David and saying, you know, concerned about the runner and what happens when he blows out his knee. I think if he's like most of the other people that I relate to, he'll figure out that he can swim, or he can do other things, or he can coach, or there's some other thing that he can do to be worthwhile. Okay. Unless your self-esteem is totally tied up in that. Now, I know that most psychiatrists know this, that athletes are the hardest to treat when it comes to mental illness and depression, because in a lot of people, depression can be managed with great exercise, but sometimes in athletes, so much of your self-esteem is tied up into winning, and when you can't do it, it's a problem.
Dr. Petrie, you're going to have to reconcile this. You've got two different perspectives here.
Let me say this. Let me say this. I think the problem that I have is that we have an extremely sedentary lifestyle. And in America today, it's very unhealthy. You can't walk a lot of places. Most people fill up their days with television. And most people, as they have limitations in transportation and other issues, they become isolated in their homes. So you absolutely have to walk. I don't care what's the matter with your knees, your arthritis, you got to walk about a mile a day. Everybody. And the reason is that's your nursing home insurance. That keeps you out of a nursing home. You can have a good quality of life even if you have memory impairment, if you've got good legs. But if you can't walk safely, then expect big problems. So I know in my practice, I see how you don't want to end your life. And I think the issue is if you've got to retain that some of that independence, and I think we've got to come up with innovative ways of keeping people together, walking together, you know, studying together, learning together, worshiping together, because the trend that you see with older people is they get more isolated. Quit going to church. I say to most of my patients, I'll leave your religious beliefs up to you, but the thing I like about church, you got to wake up, you got to get dressed, and you've got to say hello to a bunch of people. And you also got to sing.
There was one study, LaTonya, that in regard to the walking that showed you can reduce the chance of getting Alzheimer's by 60% by practicing two health habits. One is a daily walk and the other is eating a Mediterranean-style diet.
And we saw at the end of the documentary a little bit about that in terms of exercise, physical activity actually being more beneficial than the brain games that we were talking about by some studies. But Carol, I want to just give you a chance to comment, because I don't hear you saying that you're against physical activity and walking, but I think maybe what you're saying is don't disregard the importance of those who choose to sit on their porch, to use the analogy that I gave at times, and
well-
just enjoy where they are in life. But maybe I'm wrong. Tell me what you think about that.
No, and I think you had a really good point, the really important point, and that is that if your identity is so tied up in who you've been in the past, you're both saying the same thing, that when you experience the normal losses that are associated with age, that you let them stop you from getting enjoyment out of life. That is what I'm talking about. And I think in this anti-aging culture that is so youth-dominated, there's a lot of people that get depressed unnecessarily soon and early when they have their first loss or disability because they think there's something wrong with them and they become isolated. And so I love what you were saying about get to church, but I think something else happens at church or synagogue or mosque. And I think that is that every spiritual and mystical practice, they were always talking about loss of ego, transcending materialism, developing your inner life, not identifying with your ego. I mean, there's a lot of us that have spent a lot of time meditating, doing yoga, things like that, reading spiritual literature, Bible study, for heaven's sake, all of it. And the thing is that when we get older, this happens organically. I mean, organically, all those things challenge us. And can we look at aging as a spiritual opportunity, not just a panacea we throw at a problem? So I totally believe, I exercise, I'm a member of FiftyForward, absolutely. And I'm telling you, the 80-year-olds give me a big runaround. So, I mean, it's very inspiring to me. But I'm not doing it to stay young. I'm really doing it to have a balanced life in which I'm my best possible self, whatever I'm facing. And I did have to get over my ego because I'm in a chair yoga class. I'm in the silver sneakers class. I'm not on the floor doing, what the 20-year-olds can do. And that was a big transition for me of letting that go and saying, okay, I am at a level with, 70 and 80-year-olds, and I just have to accept that. And it works for me.
So much of the marketplace and the culture, though, seems to be about hanging on to youth, continuing to stay in a youthful sort of lifestyle. Products geared toward making you look younger, making you feel younger. So there is that pushback.
Taking a bunch of pills.
Exactly, and I want to talk about that.
Plastic
all the
surgery.
Products that are being pushed and the treatments and techniques, an overwhelming amount. And I'd love to start with you, Dr. Petrie, about because in some ways that's the advertising industry catering to this new generation of folks who are aging. But it's creating this dynamic that Carol is saying is out of line. It's out of kilter.
And I think, not just advertising, but I think the medical profession has overpromised.
How do you mean?
In terms of what they can do as people age, the illnesses that they can cure. We can do this, we can do that. Where the fact is that there's a whole lot that they cannot do. So that
and you're not talking about the superficial cosmetic type things.
I'm talking about that, but I'm also talking about other illnesses, cancer, degenerative diseases. You look in the paper, there's a new cure for Alzheimer's disease every week. Well, let me tell you this, we are a decade away from any substantial treatment that's going to change that. So what we're going to have to face is, how do we deal with these people in our midst? How do we deal with our family members? And I think doctors have got to be more honest with what's going to happen. And if you look, there are studies that show that if you look at physicians, and if you ask their patients, says, how long am I going to live, and so on, 2/3 of the time they are overly optimistic.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, being honest, what are things that you just are going to happen? And I mentioned vision because that certainly is something you start noticing. I've started noticing changes in my vision, but we know that eyes are going to change, your vision's going to change. And that's a realistic expectation people should have. What else? I mean, we hear about arthritis. I used to hear people growing up talking about Arthur coming to visit, meaning arthritis.
And limitation of movement. You lose 1% of your bone mass and muscle mass every year after 50. 1%? That doesn't sound like much.
And that's just going to happen naturally or
well,
organically?
unless you do some contrary work, like keep yourself active and do some resistance work. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot for a year, but if you look at a decade, you lose 10% of your muscle mass from 50 to 60. That's big.
That is big.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I
Yes.
address the elephant in the room?
Please.
Because this is a society that doesn't want to mention the D word. We die. I mean, that's the biggest.
Yes.
You know, when I had breast cancer 18 years ago, and I was able to stay positive about it and thought I'd made peace with mortality. But the thing is that breast cancer was something I could hope to recover from. When I turned 63 a few years ago, I realized I am not going to recover from aging. I mean, it really does raise the stakes. You have two choices. You can either come to terms, ask yourself the big questions about the meaning of life, or you can be in denial. And I think, you know, some people who are in denial drink too much. Some of them go for too much plastic surgery. Some of them run too much. You know, it's like what we don't want.
Present company.
Yes.
And they do it all
Thank
at the
you
same
for
time.
that.
But you know, I think what we're trying to do as a society is to actually get rid of aging, and what we want to have is an extended midlife. So you know, we're trying to obliterate the idea of it, so that it does come as a shock to us when you encounter something you can't cure with a pill or something.
And
I think you're
so
absolutely
we're
right
looking
about
for that panacea and you're saying that in some ways the medical community kind of caters to that a little bit. I want to also...
More than a little bit.
Okay, more than a little bit. I want to also address something that you kind of hint at with that, because aging is the journey toward end of life and toward dying. And depression has come up in this conversation by each of you as being something to really address. Tell us, or let's talk a little bit about how some of these things contribute to depression and why we are hearing experts say that by 20 years from now, 30 years from now, depression is going to be the leading cause of disability as people grow older. And that is a figure or a fact that we've discussed in the documentary.
Yeah, and if you look at depression in older individuals, one of the things you see is that as they become more physically infirm and develop more medical illnesses, the rates of depression go up and are increased. Now, on the other hand, what are the things that help depression? You mentioned, you mentioned fitness for depression, social connection, talking, psychotherapy,
Spirituality.
and spirituality.
Yes.
And of course, medicine too has a role in that. So yeah, it's a huge a problem for older patients because it also spoils their quality of life.
Okay.
And it ruins their ability to enjoy and appreciate and even stay connected to their spiritual life.
And so does it become this tug of war where there are a lot of factors that are contributing to depression because of aging, but the things to do to combat that are hard to do when you're depressed?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
So, and then I think we also should talk about medications, because that was a very interesting part of the documentary where we heard about how medications can just pile up and pile up and pile up, and that can contribute to this as well. I mean, Janet, do you have any thoughts about the vicious cycle that kind of comes with depression, getting out of depression, and how to deal with that?
Well, there's a really good book. It's called Spark by Dr. John Rady, and it's all about the connection between brain function and exercise. And I just think that you've got to start somewhere. You've got to do something. If it's a daily walk, if it's just getting up out of the bed, and a lot of times people have to have professional help to be able to take those steps that they need to take.
And are there resources in our community that are needed to help with that? I think it was you, Dr. Petrie, that said you need to walk, but we don't really have the infrastructure for people to walk. We know there are transportation issues. Janet, I know 50Forward has been involved in trying to help people, help this community develop some of those resources. Where are we with that?
Well, I think we're behind many, many other communities, and transportation generally is the #1 issue on any kind of community needs assessment for older adults and also for people with disabilities and even people who don't have disabilities. So that's a really important thing, and of course the last mayor, and I think Mayor Berry has put a good emphasis on livable communities, and we just need to really, really step up that effort so that we've got sidewalks and we have all the public parks and we have people living where there's retail and other kinds of things, so that you're not so separated and you don't have to depend on transportation all the time.
And 54 is doing a great job in helping with that. Let's start to wrap up our conversation. And since you're talking, Janet, just tell us one thing that we can do as a community or as individuals to pursue healthy aging. If you can just give me a brief comment about that, and then we'll let each person.
Well, I think one thing is that in most communities around the country, organizations similar to 50Forward have some local government support. Many of the senior centers throughout the country have pretty nice allocations from local government, and that has never happened in Nashville as far as that goes. In Williamson County, we have support from the City of Brentwood and also the Williamson County Commission. So right there, making an investment in 50Forward and the wonderful work that we do with about 20,000 older adults every year would be a great thing.
Well, maybe there's some council folks watching that will hear that. Dr. Petrie, pursuing healthy aging.
I think it's really helpful for most people to speak to their doctors about how they can take a substantial part in their medical care, and not just that, but what they want the end of their lives to look like. To think about, do you want to die at home?
Okay. Rather than how can I stay young, thinking about how do I age.
How do you age, and I think to talk about the pills. Do I have to take all these pills? How can I eliminate 3 of these 12 pills that I have to take every day? And to engage personally with your physician, which is really important when you do have to encounter the problems of various types of illnesses and limitations.
Very good. Carol, can you just briefly tell us what your thoughts are?
Well, I think we've got to get out of denial that we are going to be forever young and start a spiritual practice, whatever it may be, early enough in life so that when the things start piling on you, you have something inside of you and hopefully some divine wisdom or power, something greater than yourself that you can also draw upon. Because it's not always going to be something that we can handle by something we do. Sometimes it's going to have to be some sort of internal shift that we make.
Okay, great advice from each of you. Very different perspectives, but very helpful. Thank you for joining us. And we've run out of time. We thank you for tuning in to our discussion on healthy aging. If you'd like more information on this and future programs about aging in our community, go to WNPT.org/agingmatters. Thank you for watching.